everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today. I'm Zineb Riboua, Research Fellow at the Center for Peace and Security in the Middle East at Hudson Institute. And with me today, very special guests from Jerusalem, from the Jerusalem Center for Security and Foreign Affairs, to speak about the Middle East after the 12 days war. To just introduce our guest today, Dr. Michael Doran, Director and Senior Fellow of the Center for Peace and Security in the Middle East at Hudson Institute. With us also our guest, President of GCFA, Dr. Dan Diker, Senior Fellow and longtime Director of the Center on Counter-Political Warfare project at the Jerusalem Center, as well as Dr. David Wurmser, Head of the USIsrael Strategy Project and Executive and Founding Member of the Delphi Global Analysis Group. Thank you all for joining me today for this very important discussion. I thought, why not just to start with a very basic question, which is, what the Middle East is looking like now after the war? Maybe Mike, you would like to start with that.
So thanks a lot, Zineb. In my opinion, the war isn't actually over. I would look at what we're calling the 12 Days War as a major campaign inside this longer Iranian-Israeli war that began on October 7th. Iran is down. It's like a boxer that has been punched really badly in the nose and has dropped down to his knees. But he's going to get back up. He's going to shake it. He's going to shake it off. He'll still be rattled, but he's not totally out of the fight yet. And so we're in a kind of we're in a kind of an odd moment. It's absolutely the last stages of the war, and Iran is going to lose the war. Hamas is going to lose the war. Iran's agent in the Palestinian arena. Hezbollah has pretty much already lost the war. All that Iran has left now, it's lost its nuclear program. It has its ability to carry out terrorist attacks and to cause trouble politically, and it has the Houthis. That's all it has at the moment. And everyone in the region recognizes that. So it's kind of like the Middle East is kind of like the Soviet Union in 1989. We're almost in the post-Iran era, but not quite. But there's already a kind of jockeying going on among the regional powers, and the most important being Turkey, Israel, Saudi Arabia, to see who picks up the spoils of the defeated, of the crumbling Iranian empire. Iran was never so powerful that the analogy to the Soviet Union completely holds, but it had enough influence all around the region that we can see all of the changes coming. So we're in a kind of interregnum here. We're not in the new order yet. The old order is still there, but everyone is jockeying to create the new order, and we don't know exactly what the new order is going to look like.
Sorry, before I ask the same question to Dan and David, when you refer to everyone in the region is recognizing that, who are you referring to?
Israel, Saudi Arabia, and Turkey. These are, everyone. I would also say the United Arab Emirates, even the Azerbaijanis. There's a lot of movement going around in a lot of areas. The Qataris as well. But the big players, the big three, are Israel, Saudi Arabia, and Turkey.
Yes, Dan, do you have a similar vision that the war is not over yet?
I share Michael's observation that we need be cautious and mindful of the Iranian regime as bloodied, but very much still in Israel, still in the cockpit. They're still in power. The regime is very much in power. The regime still has hundreds, if not more, ballistic missiles. They have 425 to 450 kilograms of highly enriched, nearly military-grade uranium that we don't know exactly where it is. Remember, the Iranian regime are chess players and carpet weavers and take a very long view of war. Having said that, the 12-day war, similar to the 6-day war of 1967, is the most consequential reshaping of the balance of power in the Middle East since the Soviet sanctioned Arab reactionary states lost to Israel in 1967 in Israel's lightning victory. Israel today, in the 12-day war, struck an extraordinary lightning victory against the Iranian regime. And I think that military historians will be writing about this for decades, that a country the size of Maryland, within 48 hours, dominated the airspace of a country 80 times its size, and really completely dominated its enemy in such a short period of time. And from a psychological, perceptual standpoint, has also reshaped the balance of power in the Middle East, because today, more than ever, the Arab establishment, the Sunni establishment, sees Israel. And I think the Iranian regime also, in its radical Shiite character, sees Israel as the strong horse, in an Arab, Muslim, Middle East sense of being the strong horse, together with the United States. And that creates great opportunity, notwithstanding the dangers that Mike talked about, which I completely subscribe to as well, but great opportunity for Israel to set the new agenda for security, stability, and prosperity for the Middle East, together with Saudi Arabia and arguably Turkey, under certain circumstances, if Israel and Turkey can come to a greater sense of co-management of this new evolving Middle Eastern reality.
Yeah, David, do you agree with Mike and Dan's assessment so far?
I do. I do. First of all, with Mike's assessment that it's not over, which Dan also said, it first of all didn't start on June 12th, 13th. It started in 1979 with the Iranian Revolution, and I think that defined strategically the region over the last 4 decades. Then you have, so it didn't start on June 13th, and it didn't end 12 days later. It won't end, as they've said, that it's not over. The analogy I give, it's a wounded cobra. Iran is a snake, and it has, and it is wounded, but it is still in your room, and you can't turn your back on it. The second thing about Iran that is very important to remember is they know how to deal with weakness. They have been a very robust threat to Israel directly over the last decade plus, really ever since the early noughts, since 2000 or so. You saw it in 2006 with the Lebanon war, the Ring of Fire and so forth. So we've become accustomed to looking at Iran as a robust power that threatens Israel's very existence directly. But the essence of Iranian politics is how you leverage weakness into strategy and strength. And so you can't turn your back on them. That said, the key point that Dan said, which is there has been a fundamental change. Yes, laying aside the fact that Iran remains a tremendous threat, there are tectonics or deeper political movements that have been unleashed, both in the region. For example, Israeli politics, I would look 5 years in the future, will be unrecognizable to where it is today. The leadership will be different, everything will be different. This war has changed the way Israel looks at things. It's also begun to change the way the West looks at war, because Israel's faced with something that the West hasn't faced in 50, 60, 75, 80 years. The second thing is the internal politics in the United States has changed. And that changes the way it looks at the region, the way it looks at foreign policy as a whole. And the war really brought out some of these trends. You could see it with the agony, even on the conservative side, over the American intervention toward the end of the war. So I think what you're seeing is fundamental tectonic shifts, fundamental political shifts, and militarily, a whole new world. The one thing that very few people discuss is the way Israel prosecuted this war is an entirely new way to prosecute war that affects global powers as much as it affects local powers.
Thank you for these first remarks. And Mike, when we co-authored this piece for the Wall Street Journal on the cyber attacks that Israel launched, it was clear that Iran knows how to deal with weakness, but they also refused to acknowledge the weakness they had to deal with. I think they underestimate how much Israel hit them. And I was wondering, what's your, how do you see the Iranians grappling with all of that?
And thank you for mentioning that fantastic piece that you and I co-authored in the Wall Street Journal.
Of course, I had it.
It gives me an opportunity to direct everyone's attention to it. But what you and I showed there was that the Israelis, through some very, very artful cyber attacks, shook the foundations of the Iranian financial system. And they basically demonstrated to the Iranian elite, and to the IRGC in particular, that its money is not safe. And there's no one in that country now running that country who can actually have faith that their wealth, if put into government institutions or into cryptocurrency exchanges, is going to be safe. And I'm not enough of an expert on economics to have any idea what kind of long-term effect this is going to have. But I can see enough, just because I'm a human being, that complete lack of trust in those institutions by the elite is going to have very long-term impact. And it just shows how weak the regime is, or how vulnerable, I guess is probably a better way of saying it, the regime is. I can't believe at this point, and I'm speaking with a little bit of information here, having talked to people who I think have access to top secret intelligence. I don't believe that the Ayatollah Khamenei actually fully understands how bad it is right now, because everyone is lying to him. They're, in addition to having their financial system completely shaken, they have also been shown to be completely penetrated by the Israelis, by Israeli surveillance, whether through human intelligence or through electronic surveillance. They're completely penetrated, and there's a witch hunt going on. And because they're so paranoid, the number one goal of Ali Khamenei right now is to develop a loyal elite that is not penetrated by the Israelis, and he doesn't know how to do it. So that's already an extraordinarily difficult thing. And so to deal with that problem, they're putting out a message to their own people that they won, and that they won big. They slapped the United States with the attacks on Al Udeid, and they hit the Israelis. If you stand up in an environment like that and say, "Sir, we didn't win," then you're a traitor. And it's one of the reasons they're putting out the message that they won is to make sure that anyone who says anything else will identify himself very quickly as somebody who's not loyal to the regime. So in an environment like that, you can't go and say, you know what, actually, we just had our asses handed to us in a sling. You can't do it. You can't do it. So he's not getting information that's reliable at all. And we're not going to know what the considered Iranian response to what just happened to them is for, I think, months.
Yeah, Dan, yeah.
So I want to just make an observation here about the extant Iranian regime dangers. Mike mentioned I would call it the staged and directed counterattack on Qatar, or as it's known in Washington, Qatar, which President Trump actually thanked the regime for warning him, which is a perfect psyop of the Iranian regime, and very dangerous, because the Iranian regime are clearly among the most sophisticated political warriors that there are in the world, in the world today. And what what the regime is still trying to do is to drive a wedge between Israeli security first policy on Iran and America deal diplomacy policy regarding Iran, Saudi, and Turkey, and Syria. And that's no small thing, because the more that the Iranians play diplomacy, if you will, or act as the beneficent counter-attacker, that eliciting a thank you from President Trump, it's a very worrying development, because they're very, very good at that, and that is their strategy. Keep driving a wedge between Israel and the United States, and then bide for time. And biding for time also means they also intersects with a very, very robust international terror network, not only the proxy network, much of which is neutered today, but we're talking about terror networks in Latin America, in Africa, in Asia, and this is going to be reminiscent of Al-Qaeda, ISIS operations around the world. The regime has that. So the combination of political warfare, driving a wedge between Israel and the United States in this post-12-day war environment, and the international terror network, we must be very, very mindful of what their capabilities are.
Yeah, it's very interesting, because one of the things that happened is that there was this day of victory right after Iran's defeat, to the point where it actually annoyed Trump, that Trump tweeted about it, that he said something of oh, Khamenei, we actually defeated you, I actually kept you alive, why are you talking about victory? It annoyed Trump immensely. And so, David, when you see all of this, how do you think the Iranians are trying to reassert themselves?
Well, it's interesting because I raised the issue of Iran has a strategy of how to leverage weakness to strength. But that said, if you look at Iranian strategy over the last decade or two, it was un-Iranian. They convinced themselves of their strength. They convinced that, now there were still a lot of elements of, a strategy of weakness has three things. One is, you understand that the order of battle is against you. You want a predictable enemy because you want to manipulate the enemy. And predictability is essential for your ability to manipulate them. And then you burrow into their soul and you undermine them from within. So it's political warfare in the end, information and political narrative warfare. The Iranians in the last decade or two relied much more heavily on the idea that they are actually more powerful than Israel. And they became highly predictable. And the Israelis got in their information loop. The Israelis were the ones who became unpredictable in this war. The Israelis were the ones who understood order of battle can be overcome by an effective use of human intelligence. When I said there was an innovation in war, what I meant was, we all had spent most of our lives understanding and there's many publications, Jane's and so forth, about order of battle between armies, which armies are strong and which are weak. And Israel eliminated any relevance to that in the way they attacked Iran. Whatever weapons Iran had were irrelevant to what Israel did to paralyze them, because they destroyed the chain of command, they got into their structures through human intelligence, and they essentially paralyzed Iran so that any asset it had was no longer that effective to use. Now, it still had stuff, it wasn't hermetic, it wasn't complete. You saw the missiles and stuff like that. But this is where the Iranian reliance on power went so wrong, because at that point, the Israelis were the ones the Iranians couldn't understand. They couldn't predict. They couldn't control through manipulation. They couldn't even drive a wedge between Israel and the United States effectively. So, and the best example of it is something the Iranians themselves now say, is they believe jinn, the genies, control. Israel delivered its victory through the use of jinn.
I did see those tweets. I don't know, from I think Iran International made public that they thought that there are amulets that were put in some offices, etc.
But you see, this is false.
Well, no, I don't think it's false, but but it shows that the Iranians now fear that Israel has mastered a strategy that they always. The whole idea is the Israelis used to started saying after October 7th, in Hebrew it was, L'daber Aravit, lo ma'aravit, to speak Arabic, not Western. But what it really is they became what's called the majnun. The jinn took over your soul, and you are unpredictable and crazy. And in the Middle East, when the jinn take over somebody, you just take your distance. These are unpredictable people. These are dangerous people. Just stay away. The moment that the Iranians said the jinn were used by Israel, they were essentially saying that the Israelis have become the Majnun, the crazy guy on the block you can't deal with. You just got to stay away. And that's exactly what Iran always wanted to be, using the predictability of their enemies. So this is all now inverted. So Iran has to sort of return to its foundations, dealing with an enemy, Israel, who knows these things. And that's why I think, yes, they've been severely damaged. Yes, they are very dangerous still. But they really have been dealt a major blow here. And it's not clear that they understand how to get out of it.
Yeah, especially because they do rely on proxies, Mike. I mean, one of the things that we saw was Hezbollah hesitating to join the fight against Israel. The Houthis are still firing, but they run out of ballistic and cruise missiles. They're still using their reserves, apparently. How do you see Iran, the Islamic Republic, trying to come up with a new strategy? Do you think entering again in negotiations with the United States would be the way to go?
I don't see how they cannot. Because the Israelis have made it clear that if they try to do anything, so our assumption right now is that the enriched uranium is under the ground, and if the Iranians start digging, the Israelis are going to hit them. Their ballistic missile production capacity has been destroyed by Israel. If they start rebuilding it, Israel's going to hit them. And the only way they can restrain Israel from doing those things is with the United States. But in order to get the goodwill of Donald Trump, in order to do what Dan was saying and drive this wedge between Trump's desire for negotiations and the desire of the Israelis to finish the job, is to give Donald Trump something he wants. But what he wants is zero enrichment, an acceptance a public acceptance by the Iranians of zero enrichment. So they can either just muddle through, or if they want to move forward in some sort of serious way, like create an umbrella under them to protect them from an Israeli attack, so that they can rebuild their missiles, or begin some kind of serious program that could improve their defenses. Then they have to give something to Trump. I don't know how to square that circle. And like I said, I don't think they have fully grasped just how badly they got whacked, and how vulnerable they are, say, through their financial measures and others to further pressure. Can I just say one thing about Dave's analysis? Because I agree 100% with it, but I just want to add one more element here. Because I myself have been wondering why the complete miscalculation by the Iranians in this war, and when I say this war, I'm talking about from October 7th until yesterday, they really overplayed their hand, and very uncharacteristically. And I think the key mistake they made was on America and Donald Trump. Donald Trump was the guy who was the most unpredictable, and he behaved outside of the patterns of every other American president since Bill Clinton, for sure. It's really not since Reagan that there was an American president that was really willing to put serious military pressure on Iran. And they were, all of them presidents since Reagan have had a tendency to restrain Israel with respect to Iran. And that gave the Iranians a sense of invulnerability. And I think they forgot what the basic mechanisms were that were making them invulnerable. It wasn't their amazing capabilities. It was the United States of America.
I think, Zineb, there's also an important point here about U.S.-Israel relations in the aftermath of the 12-day war, in the sense that today, as opposed to in decades past, it would be accurate to say that Israel and America are two allies, aligned but independent. And the traditional Israeli dependency relationship with the United States has now changed for two reasons. One is October 7th. The October 7th reality fundamentally shook Israel out of a certain identity structure in which it played a very muscular but definitely secondary role in the relationship with America and the guarantee, what they called a QME, qualitative military edge as the structure of the defense relationship. And today, in the post-12-day war reality, what Israel showed the world, and particularly the United States, is this is an independent, sovereign, major power that has changed its national security concept since October 7th, and then mobilized it beginning very demonstrably in September of 2024, when in these lightning assassinations, eliminated the Hezbollah senior and mid-level command, Hamas senior and mid-level command, and other Iranian proxy agents as well, and hit the Houthis pretty hard. And I think in the war against the regime showed America that Israel could actually neutralize the world's #1 sponsor of international terrorism alone, which I think infused President Trump with the confidence of Israel having cleared airways for the United States. Phenomenal striking of Fordo, Isfahan. And I think that's a very important point for U.S.-Israel relations, because it really positions Israel as a much more independent actor than it was, I think, understood in the past, in its own sense, its own self-identity, as well as to America.
Yeah, it also seems that it also showed a new path for how the United States and its most reliable ally in the Middle East can cooperate. Because it was very interesting that I think last week, Trump was talking to the Ukrainians, and he said that there is a new period, 50 days, for discussions with Russia. And he told the Ukrainians that there are negotiations going on. But hey, what can you do to hit Moscow? And it seems that Trump was actually thinking about how much the Israelis are a model for a collaboration with the United States. And so, so David, how do you see this going on between Washington and Jerusalem?
What happened was that Israel matured, not only in terms of capability, but mentality, into a major regional power. Until this war, Israel had obviously developed capabilities, but its mentality was still of a weak nation hanging on, defensive, able to defend itself on its borders, but it didn't think in terms of power projection regionally. And once it starts thinking of itself in that way, it becomes a fundamentally different asset for the United States. Because at that point, the United States isn't just worried about, do we or don't we have to intervene to help Israel protect itself. All of a sudden, Israel becomes a really useful tool to get things done in the region if the United States itself can't necessarily do it, or doesn't want to do it, or has other priorities and so forth. Not that Israel is simply an asset to use, but a true partner rather than a charge. So although Steve Bannon now has decided Israel is a protectorate, the truth is the inversion of that Israel has stopped being a protectorate and has become a partner. The second thing, just returning for a moment to Mike, on the issue of Iranian, well, actually, I just kind of forgot what I was going to say, but that's all right. I'll leave it there, and we can return to it later.
Yeah, I was wondering, Mike, how do you see Trump now thinking of Israel, or how, because there was this divide, and you wrote a lot about the isolationist side, but also Trump's simple, raw, primal instincts of seeing a victory and seizing it. How do you see Trump probably reshaping Israel's role in the U.S. national security strategy or apparatus?
Well, I think it's pretty clear where he wants to go. He would like to see, President Obama said to David Remnick in, what's the name of that rag that Remnick is?
New Yorker.
The New Yorker. In the New Yorker interview, he said that every president gets one paragraph in the history books. And if you want to be a successful president, you have to know ahead of time what you want your paragraph to say. And I think we know what Trump's paragraph in the Middle East is supposed to say. It's supposed to say through a very judicious use of force with very well-defined goals, he was able to establish a new regional balance of power that led to a string of peace agreements between Israel and Lebanon, Israel and Syria, Armenia and Azerbaijan, possibly ending with a normalization between Saudi Arabia and Israel, maybe Indonesia and Israel as well, but a new regional order, and one in which Iran would also partake in the development of the region. That's the vision that he has. I think the region is going to do what it always does, which is it's going to organize against that.
Mm.
The Iranians are going to try to foil it. So we'll see. I thought Dave put it very well that they have always had a strategy of weakness in the past, and so they're very good at assassinations. And what were the tools that they used before they had missiles, ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, and drones? They had the car bomb and the assassination and the kidnapping and so on. And they'll engage in those kinds of activities. If you're a Lebanese politician and you're moving toward isolating Hezbollah in some way, you're going to get killed, that sort of thing. At the same time, there's a competition going on among Turks, Saudis, and Israelis to be the privileged interlocutor with Donald Trump on the future of the region. They don't want, neither the Saudis nor the Turks have an interest in seeing Israel elevated to the role of primary interlocutor. And that's what a flowering of Abraham Accords means across the region. So they're certainly not going to do that while the Gaza war is still going on, the war in Gaza is still going on. And there's probably an inclination on their part to use the Gaza question and other similar questions in order to make Israel, I don't know necessarily anathema, but to make it not a privileged interlocutor with other Middle Eastern, Muslim states. So both in ways really crude, the Iranian sort of crude direct attack on the let's call it the Trump plan, and a more subtle reprioritization of issues by the Turks and the Saudis. I doubt we're going to see a big proliferation of peace accords with Arab countries, but I could be wrong about this. I could be wrong. We may see Armenian-Azerbaijani peace, and I'm finding the Turks a little inscrutable on Syria. They may see it in their interest as that some kind of accommodation between Israel and Syria is in their interest. The Saudis may make the same calculation. So I could be wrong. I don't want to push that analysis too stridently.
Yeah, Dan, do you?
Yeah, it's interesting. Mike wrote recently, and I actually quoted you and sent it to you by email, but you were probably too busy to read it. The quotes that I wrote about Israel's policy of security first and prevention regarding the Soweto attacks that we unfortunately, and the horrors that we witnessed there. The Iranian regime, in its great sophistication, it was suggested by you, could possibly be working with former regime commanders as an Iranian operation in Syria in order to, which it's done frequently in the past, to destroy whatever developments there were between President Trump and al-Shara. And at the same time, what's happening in Gaza right now, which is a complete retardation of the expected outcome in Washington, D.C. 2 weeks ago between a week-long meetings between Israelis and the Americans. This is an Iranian, Gaza is an Iranian regime theater. And we tend to forget that because of the tendency of the Western media to compartmentalize Lego structures, if you will, in the Middle East. But if you look at the elephant in the room, it is very much the Palestinian issue. On the one hand, the Iranian regime is mobilizing Hamas, and that is way behind where anyone thought it would be today, where Hamas is still driving the leverage in the Hamas theater against Israel. And recent developments are rather extraordinary that Hamas is demanding of Israel to do, which would signal a loss. And the Iranian regime is playing on the lack of patience of the United States. Let's get Hamas and Gaza done, and let's move on to normalization. Let's move on to a Saudi, U.S. led new Middle East. And the Iranian regime knows this, and they understand how to drive that again, that wedge by keeping the theater alive. And as I think we'll see this, I haven't seen that much commentary on this next point, but they will be the drivers of what they call Palestinian statehood in Judea and Samaria, otherwise known as the former West Bank of Jordan. And I think you will see that the Saudis, this is the odd paradox here, is that the Saudis, the United States, and the Iranian regime share an interest in pushing the Palestinian state issue. And there is absolutely zero appetite in Israel, zero. We did polling at the Jerusalem Center for Security and Foreign Affairs on this issue, and from left to right, there's just no appetite for another Palestinian terrorist state, this time over, from the hills of the West Bank, of Judea and Samaria, overlooking Ben Gurion Airport. It's just not going to happen. So that's a combustion that the Iranian regime knows very well how to mobilize and fuel that keeps them very much in the game.
Very interesting. And David, do you have any?
Yeah. First of all, I do remember what I was going to say is that in the unpredictability of Trump, the Iranians should have noticed that Trump is capable of that when he killed Soleimani, because that was something the Iranians did not expect.
But I was thinking that maybe because of the isolationist, Tucker Carlson, all of these podcasts, etc., this proliferation of, the anti-war, no to war with Iran, because the Iranians do read a lot of American media and they consume it. And maybe the isolationists were the ones doing the helping for the deception.
They did help for the deception. I think this is where the isolationist crowd doesn't understand its impact. Namely, it is provoking and leading to the very wars that they wish to avoid. By projecting the idea that America has no will to engage in war and the weakness that comes with that, it's hard to make America great again if America retreats into an ostrich politic type situation. The moment the ostrich buries his head in the sand, the predator is still out there. And all it does is give the predator an advantage. So I think the isolationists actually encourage the very wars that they purport to avoid. But on the Israeli thing, what Dan is saying, it's very important here. I think the big change that's happening in Israel, it didn't happen yet, it's happening, is we have to recognize the fact that despite Israel's great victory, it's still a small country, and both geographically and demographically. And the second thing is it's a free democratic country. Those two things combine in a specific way. The free democratic country, most people want to just mind their own business. They aren't mobilized for militaristic adventures and campaigns and imperialism. Most free societies, people descend into just minding their own business. Their own lives and their dreams are what they're after. In Israel's case, that becomes a strategic problem because it is too small to rely on a standing army, a professional standing army. It needs to have reserves. And reserves require a mobilization of society that a free society is not normally engaged in. Now, the Swiss did it 800 years ago. The Americans did it in 1776. But they managed to do it because they leveraged their geography in order to have a situation where they had a buffer that allowed them to absorb the first strike while they mobilized for war that they didn't expect or didn't want. So October 7th, like October 6th, 1973, is an expected, and like Pearl Harbor, is an expected outcome for a democracy. We don't think war day and night, so we get surprised. Israel fell into the same pattern, and inherently so. So Israel strategically is now shifting its outlook, which means preemption, absorption, that is areas that become zones of protection or absorption, maybe some which you actually control, most likely Judea-Samaria, the West Bank, and Gaza becomes an internal thing that Israel has to positively control. But this is where Syria gets very complex. There's some areas beyond Israel which they don't want to control, but are a buffer zone. And this is where I think Turkey and Israel right now are in a dance. I don't understand Turkey. Mike understands it 1,000 times better than I do. But my sense is the Turks are trying to figure the Israelis out and what's going on in Syria, because they've never, this is not an Israel they've dealt with. This is an Israel that's saying we have specific interests in Syria beyond which Israel is not willing to compromise. And yet, Turkey has not seen that beyond Israel's borders. Israel's been dealing with Gaza, not with Sueda. So this is a whole new ball game. But this is the way Israel's headed strategically, that there will be zones that Israel has under its control, which is probably their form of the river to the sea. And then there will be zones beyond which Israel wants relatively demilitarized and no foreign armies. Some nations are that, like Jordan, but other areas, like perhaps southern Syria. So I think we have to begin to realize Israel now is going to a very different place strategically.
Yeah, Mike, on Israel, Turkey, but also Israel, Turkey, and the United States, because Trump is, I mean, since the very beginning, with the U.S. envoy Tom Barak, committed to solving the Syria problem. Trump met with al-Shara to the Saudis. There was this whole campaign, really, for the United States to push for either stabilizing Syria or finding a way at the confliction, at least with Israel. How do you see that going?
It's in trouble at the moment. I'm hoping that cooler heads will prevail in Jerusalem, Ankara, and Damascus, and that an accommodation will be found. There was a report today that Baku is holding another round of mediation with all the players. So I have some hope, but this is a real gray area. You know, the Israelis basically drew a line and said no heavy weaponry by the regime below a certain line, but then regime-aligned forces went without heavy weaponry beyond that line, and it put Israel in a dilemma because the Israelis haven't fully committed to completely protecting, to completely controlling that territory in order to protect the Druze whom they have put under their protection. So it's a gray area of just how committed the Israelis are and what they're willing to do, what they can do, and elements are testing them. Whether those elements are under the command and control of the Turks, under the command and control of Shara, completely independent, some mix of the three, is really hard. Is really hard to say. The United States wants a unified Syria. The Syrians want a unified Syria. The Turks and Saudis want a unified Syria. Israel's not so sure. And that's the sort of big strategic element here, that this exploitation of this gray area by whomever is exploiting it. And it's really not clear. Dan mentioned that I put out a tweet saying that the Iranians could have a role. It's certainly possible that the Iranians had a role. A lot of people have called me up to tell me I'm crazy about that, and maybe I am. But I'm also following Iranian propaganda.
Yeah, they're delighted.
They're delighted by it. They're totally delighted by it. And a lot of what the Iranians are saying is identical to what a lot of Israelis and pro-Israelis are saying. The Iranians don't want a unified Syria. A lot of Israelis are ambivalent about a unified Syria. So this being the Middle East, I mean, it's quite amazing. While the Iranian-Israeli conflict is yet to come to an end, there's a certain overlap in their perceptions of what's desirable in Syria. I think the Israelis should take note of that and be a little bit less happy about this, or be a little bit less inclined toward a decentralized Syria. But that is the key question, because if the Israelis are going to go for a decentralized Syria, then they're at odds simultaneously with the United States, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and Damascus, and they're aligning with the Iranians.
Sorry, before I go to Dan, if you had to explain the Iranian interest in this, especially because it seems like it's the last card. I mean, the Russians did not help them, the Chinese did not help them, but trouble in Syria seems to be the perfect recipe to get back at Israel. If you had to summarize.
Are you talking to me?
Sorry, it's to Mike.
To you, Mike.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, I thought you said Dan.
No, before I go back to that, but
I totally zoned out. I became lost in my own thoughts.
No.
They were fantastic, by the way, but they had nothing to do with what you were talking about.
No, I meant if you had to summarize what the Iranian interest is in destabilizing Syria, because because the Russians and the Chinese did not rescue Khamenei, seems like it's the last card, really.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, the Iranians, as we've all said, they're very, very good at this kind of game. And I think it comes from their own internal politics. The Persians are surrounded by minorities all around the perimeter of Iran, and those minorities have connections, ties of affinity, culture, religion with their brethren across the border in other countries, and so they've gotten very good at playing those minorities off against each other, so they don't have a coalition against them, and they just extend that out into the region. October 7th was an Iranian play. Look how brilliant it was from an Iranian point of view. Just before October 7th, you had Saudi-Israeli normalization moving forward, and you had a huge thaw in relations between Ankara and Jerusalem. And October 7th destroyed all of that. And from an Iranian point of view, that's the really scary thing, is if you have Ankara, Jerusalem, and Riyadh all on the same page, all under the American umbrella, and you have a unified American bloc. If it's not unified, at least an orderly American bloc. That is the scariest thing to the Iranians. They want to bust it up. They busted it up with October 7th. They're continuing, as Dan said, to use the Gaza for that purpose, and it's working well. It's also creating tensions between the United States and Europe, and between Europe and Israel, and so on. And now in Syria, they want to bust up the danger in Syria is a potential Saudi, Turkey, Israel, U.S. agreement on the new order in Syria. They'll do anything they can to blow that up.
Including enhance, encourage, and supply the destruction of Gaza for the media, psychological, political warfare effect. I mean, they're more than happy. We've seen, historically, we've seen the Iranian regime kill Shiites in order to trigger and drive the Shia-Sunni divide and ongoing 1,500-year war. And so they're more than happy to see the total destruction of Gaza and the unprecedented inflammation of anti-Semitism, which is, we have never seen this type of Jew hatred, Jewish state hatred in the United States and Europe, to be sure, since the Second World War period. And it's a matter of glee for the Iranian regime, because that is, anti-Semitism is a political warfare lever for them, and something they can use to pressure Israel. That is their strategy. Pressure Israel by jumping into these and dividing all of these theaters. The second discrete comment I'd like to make is that Israel's experience with united centralized command, and you take the Palestinian issue as an example, which didn't work well with the Palestinian Authority, was one of the greatest self-inflicted strategic catastrophes that Israel has actually brought on itself. I would say that any democratic country brought on itself in decades. And therefore, Israel sees the opportunity of a more federal Middle East that is broken up according to its natural and organic tradition of families, tribes, and clans, which is the natural organic structure of as the great Bernard Lewis, I think, taught all of us, than any kind of sort of European-style, Sykes-Picot, centralized, Westphalian nation state. That is completely foreign to the Middle East.
But you're referring to Syria in the...
I'm referring to Syria in the sense that Israel has suffered from facing these centralized, whether it's the Assad family dictatorship for 50 years, or whether it's the Palestinian issue in West Bank and Gaza. So from an Israeli point of view, it works much better to protect and ally and deal with minority communities across the Middle East, because it creates balance of power between tribes, clans, and families that arguably make the Middle East a safer place.
Very interesting. And David, do you agree with this?
Yeah, I think Dan's getting into something here which is important. The Israelis, when I said that their strategy had this vulnerability of mobilization and so forth, Israel had known that it had that vulnerability, but it had a different way of dealing with it for the last 50 years, since 1967. Which it believed that a combination of deterrence and incentives can manage the problem across their border and prevent a major war. 73, they're still trying to figure out why that happened. Mm-hmm. And if after 50 years Israel hasn't, I doubt they will. But at the end of the day, that's what collapsed on October 7th. The idea that you didn't have to physically fight a war to protect yourself, but through deterrence, application of deterrence, and incentives, you could essentially keep a threat at arm's length. And if you look at it that way, keeping a threat at arm's length through deterrence and incentives, you want one address. You don't want chaos. You can't deter chaos. You can't manage chaos. You can't incentivize chaos. So Israel's policy had been actually, we want an address. We want an address in Lebanon. So they convinced themselves that Hezbollah, we need to pretend Beirut really controls Lebanon, because that way we at least have an address for deterrence. And maybe that, and same with Jordan. It came to some extent out of the war of attrition and the battle over the Palestinian issue from 1967 to 1970, where the pressure toward the Jordanian regime eventually led the Jordanian regime to understand the threat, crack down on the PLO, and expel them from the country in Black September, which then led to the Lebanon problem, which then led Israel trying to do the same thing in Lebanon. So Israel's had, I think, a policy generally of centralized addresses that they can direct their deterrence and their management toward. And that failed on October 7th. What they realized on October 7th was belief mattered. These are genuine believers when you're dealing with Sinwar, and that you can't necessarily deter them the way we would understand deterrence. You can't manage them the way we would understand management. And when they look at Jilani and they look at the problem, they still see ISIS, they still see Al-Qaeda, they see Hamas. So for them, the problem isn't to centralize Syria. They still believe this is now the phenomenon we just dealt with in Hamas. And if we have that on our northern border, then what have we achieved? And deterrence won't work. So that's why they're going much more toward a buffer strategy. And it looks like they want to divide Syria, and practically it does divide Syria. But I don't think that it's in principle an idea that they want small entities and chaos on their border because chaos is weaker.
Yeah, and it also means more Iran next to.
Well, yeah. Now the Iran issue is, I agree with. I would go even more strongly than Mike. I don't know. I don't think the Iranians managed to have that inroads with the Druze or so forth. But the Iranians are joyous, and so are the Russians, by the way.
Yeah.
And they are trying every which way possible to get back in the door, and they have to, because one of the other things that happened in this war is the death of the Shiite awakening. It hasn't yet dawned on Tehran, but it's dawning on the Shiites in Lebanon that the awakening that was triggered in the 70s, before the Iranian Revolution, was hijacked by the Iranian Revolution and is going down with the Iranian Revolution. So as a result, the Iranians are facing a catastrophe. They have to reverse it in Lebanon and in Syria, not just regionally against Israel. In those specific places, it's a must-win for them. And so they're doing everything they can. Even, I wouldn't rule out working with some Sunni terrorists or so forth to try to get back in, Al-Qaeda remnants or ISIS.
They've done it before.
Yeah, they don't.
They've done it
After
before.
9/11.
I mean, you know, Al-Masri, which is the head of the political council of Al-Qaeda, was in Tehran all along, and bin Laden's son was there. They've done it before. The Sunni-Shiite divide is very important, but it is not absolute.
Yeah. Yeah, unfortunately, we're running out of time, but I would like to take the opportunity, since you're all here, to just ask you some of your prediction. 3 months from now, how do you see Washington and Israel, Washington and Jerusalem dealing with the Syria question? Maybe Mike.
You're going to make me start. Wow, the prediction.
Are you optimistic, less optimistic, cautiously optimistic, absolutely pessimistic?
I'm not absolutely pessimistic. I'm a pess-optimist. I think that there's. I think that there's. I think we're going to continue to be muddling through, just by the nature of the beast. Shara doesn't have total control over the country, and
many people seem to forget that, actually.
To me, it's a key factor, and it's hard for him to establish it for all kinds of reasons. And I think we're going to be about where we are. I'm not expecting. There can always be the black swan event, like the Iranians or someone else could assassinate him. That would really throw everything in. I'm sure they're thinking about it. Definitely sure they're thinking about it, because it would really create conditions for chaos. But if I have to predict, I say we're going to be muddling through like we're doing now.
Yeah, Dan?
I think muddling through is a good term. It's a down-to-earth term, but it describes exactly there is an internal contradiction right now between the way that America First security policy in the Middle East is playing out and the Israel security first policy is playing out. And what I mean to say is that President Trump took a major risk upon himself by delisting Syria and relieving them of all sanctions on a very weak, Dave has made this point numerous times, on a very weak Syria foundational new Syria. And we've seen the results of that. And Israel suffers from the results of that. That requires that in Israel's a security-first strategy, which means they will prevent from the very outset any intention, any beginnings of a return to threaten Israel's borders, and that is what people, I think, in Washington need to understand about why Israel bombed Sueda. It wasn't only to help the Druze, and Israel has 170,000 Druze between Israeli citizens in the Golan Heights, but it is to send a very specific message of deterrence and prevention, because the Sueda is only between 60 and 75 miles from the Israeli border, and Israel must have defensible borders, not only in the east with the 4,200-foot rise in the over its major infrastructure and airport, but now to its north and its south. It must have, as Dave Wurmser said, defensible borders, buffer security, demilitarization zones. This is the new reality that Israel lives with, and Syria is the first kind of canary in the coal mine, if you will, to use that metaphor, for Israel. And that really requires that Israel and America be on the same page in terms of the security-first approach to the Middle East before any kind of normalization takes place and any kind of delisting of sanctions.
Can I jump in there before you let Dave
go
make?
ahead.
Dave, may I?
Please.
I just want to say that, in my view, a U.S. brokered arrangement between Ankara and Jerusalem is the single most important thing. All of our minds right now are focused on the bloodletting that's gone on in Sueda, and it's very important, and it pulls one's emotions in. But for the long-term stability of the country, there has to be a Turkish-Israeli understanding, and the only power on earth that can bring that about is the United States.
Yeah, David.
So I'm glad Mike brought that up, because that's exactly where I was going to head.
I stole it from you.
You read my mind.
It's going to cost you dinner.
It's the gin.
You're a pessimist, I'm an optimist, whatever one calls it. But at the end of the day, I think there's going to be a lot of nastiness, especially rhetorically, between Turkey and Israel. It's going to be tense. But at the end of the day, Israel does not want a conflict with Turkey, absolutely wants to avoid it. And Turkey does not have a history of direct confrontation with its neighbors ever since 1860, the Crimean War.
Yes.
So I'm not sure Turkey really is eager to engage in a direct military confrontation.
It's not.
And as a result, I think it's going to be messy, it's going to be muddling, but we're in the process of seeing red lines and zones being defined slowly that will eventually settle into, I don't want to say stable, because there will always be probing and some violence and so forth, but I think we're going to see sort of an understanding emerge organically. And like Mike says, the best thing America can do is to codify something that is organically emerging. And so I think that's what will happen. The radical factor here is Syria. The Saudis, I think, actually are somewhat irrelevant at this point. Syria, I think, the thing that worries me is the dynamics of tyranny. This also applies to Tehran. The dynamics of tyranny, these countries are very unique and have their own cadence in politics, but the dynamics of tyranny has universal elements. And specifically in the case of Syria, you've had a major radical revolution, radical coming from the word radix, root. The root of society has been upturned. Those sorts of revolutions are never one-step processes. They're always two-step. Whether it's the French Revolution, you had the Girondists, and then you led to Robespierre. Then you had Kerensky leading to Lenin, and then you had Shapur Bakhtiar leading to Khomeini. I'm not sure we're at the end state of the Syrian revolution. I think it's more likely than not a two-step revolution. There are forces underneath that are more powerful than Giuliani, which is why I don't even think it's that important to ask what really is on Giuliani's mind. Because I think Mike's right. I don't think he fully controls the events. I think things will happen beyond him. On the flip side, Iran, the other side of tyranny is three elements basically manage survival in tyranny, which is an image of omnipotence, an image of confidence, and an image of brutality. Iran has been shown to be impotent. Iran may beat its breast, but Iran is showing fear. It's not confident. And in terms of brutality, yes, it still has those instruments, but it doesn't even trust its own forces at this point. Everybody who's alive, in many ways, the only safe thing to be in Iran right now in the leadership is dead, because everybody who's alive could be an Israeli agent, according to the way the Israelis are. So it's really not safe to be alive.
I think
Much safer to be dead.
One of my favorite moments in the 12-day war was when Ismail Khani tweeted out that he's not
Not an
he's
Israeli.
not an Israeli agent.
So,
Because all the Israelis kept saying that he was.
so while I'm talking about a condominium between Israel and Turkey eventually sort of organically emerging over the next years, I don't believe we're going to be talking about the Julani Ashara regime or the Iranian regime in a few years, because the dynamics of revolution and tyranny will take both down.
Let's not call it a condominium between Turkey and
a co-op.
No, let's call it a weekend affair. So that in public they'll be enemies, but in private on the weekend they'll be getting together.
Yeah, so it's so I guess it's a more of a let's wait and see situation. So with that, Dan, David, Mike, thank you very much
you,
for
Zineb.
joining me. It was a pleasure to speak with you today, and thank you to our viewers for listening to us on the Middle East and what is coming and what is happening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Zineb. It was great.